Welcome to Starbound HFY. My name is Johnny, and I'll be your narrator for today. If you'd like to unlock early access to new videos and help support our human team, tap Join below to become a Starbound member. Now, let's get into today's story. The office chair rocketed across the room, trailing smoke and the distinct smell of burning synthetic fabric, which Vince McKinnon would later insist was an essential part of the demonstration. Newton's third law had never been explained with quite so much property damage, though, to be fair, most physics teachers didn't strap model rocket engines to furniture. "Every action," Vince announced, picking himself up from the wreckage of his desk with the ease of someone who'd done this before, "has an equal and opposite reaction." He grinned through the smoke, adjusting his Metallica t-shirt under the mandated teacher's vest that had seen better days. Several students actually looked up from their datapads for the first time all semester. "Which is why your final grades are inversely proportional to how hard I hit this wall." A Thalassian student in the back row, basically a sentient rock formation that had decided to pursue education, made a grinding noise that translated as mild interest. For kicks, this was practically a standing ovation. "That was actually kind of cool," admitted Dante Reeves from his usual spot in the corner, where he'd perfected the art of looking bored while secretly paying attention. The 17-year-old had the kind of carefully cultivated disinterest that only came from years of being told you'd amount to nothing and deciding to lean into it. "Kind of cool?" Vince's eyes lit up with the manic energy of a teacher who'd just gotten a nibble. "Dante, my friend, that was science. That was the universe's fundamental laws made manifest through controlled explosions and poor safety protocols." "Speaking of poor safety protocols," buzzed Specs, her dolphin-like features managing to convey disdain despite the species difference. "Isn't that the third chair this month?" "Fourth," Vince corrected cheerfully. "But who's counting? Besides accounting, and Principal Torrington, and technically the fire marshal, but he's more concerned about the..." He paused, noticing the huddle of students around Dante's datapad. "What you got there?" The group scattered like they'd been caught with contraband, which, in Terminus Theta Secondary School, could mean anything from actual contraband to last year's standardized test answers. They tried to hide the datapad, but Vince had reflexes honed by years of dodging thrown wrenches in old Detroit chop shops. "The Terminus Terror Run," Vince read aloud, his eyebrows climbing toward his perpetually grease-stained hairline. "The annual inter-school death race where teenagers pilot heavily modified spacecraft through the station's superstructure while trying not to die? That Terminus Terror Run? Are we in this?" The class erupted in bitter laughter. It wasn't the fun kind of laughter either. It was the kind that came from kids who'd been told no so many times they'd stopped asking. "We're the loser school," Dante muttered, slumping further into his seat. "Poor kids from the gutter of space. We don't do things like that. They'd spend hours explaining safety protocols to us like we're brain-dead chimps." Vince stood there for a moment, processing this information. His students watched as several expressions crossed his face in rapid succession. Surprise, thoughtfulness, determination, and finally, the kind of grin that in certain parts of the galaxy was classified as a weapon. "Not with that attitude," he said. "We're Death Worlders, son. They have us skip safety protocols because we're the best." Principal Buzz Torrington's office had seen better days, which was true of most things in Terminus Theta Secondary. The walls were covered in motivational posters so old they'd achieved historical significance, and his desk looked like it had survived at least 3 separate conflicts, which it had. Vince bounced on his heels outside the door, listening to the parade of rejections happening inside. Mrs. Calvin wanted new chemistry equipment. Denied. Mr. Zorlak needed replacement components for the computer lab. Denied. Coach Williams requested actual gravity in the gymnasium. Definitely denied. When his turn came, Vince practically vibrated into the office. "No," Torrington said before Vince could open his mouth. "You don't even know what I'm asking for." You're bouncing like you've had too much coffee, which means you have an idea, which means it's going to cost money, endanger students, or both. Torrington rubbed his temples, looking every one of his 58 years. The answer is no. What if I told you it was educational? No. What if I said it would improve student engagement? No. What if I mentioned it would give our students practical experience in physics, chemistry, and engineering while building character and school spirit? Torrington looked up, fixing Vince with the weary gaze of a man who'd spent 30 years in the military and thought education would be easier. McKinnon, what part of no is giving you trouble? The N or the O?
The Terminus Terror Run,
Vince said quickly, before Torrington could throw him out.
I want to enter a team.
The principal's laugh was short and humorless. The death race. You want to enter our students, my students, in a competition where the mortality rate is only kept low by extensive medical waivers?
It's a practical application of...
It's suicide. Torrington slammed his hand on the desk, making several ancient coffee stains jump. Do you have any idea what those other schools spend on their racing teams? Apex Academy's pilot training program alone costs more than our annual budget. But you need a ship, a racing-grade vessel with shields, engines that won't explode, and navigation systems that actually navigate. Where exactly do you plan to get one of those? The magical ferry ship? Vince's grin widened. Funny you should mention that. Torrington's eyes narrowed. McKinnon, whatever you're thinking...
The school has one.
No, we don't.
Yes, we do. I checked the inventory archives. A decommissioned Stingray security interceptor from the station's founding. It's in Munitions Bay 7.
Torrington's face went through several interesting color changes. That's not a ship. That's a memorial to bad decisions. It's been sitting there for 50 years. 53 years, actually. But who's counting? It doesn't have engines. We'll find some. Or navigation. We'll figure it out. Or life support. Details. Torrington stood up, using his full height advantage to loom over Vince, which would have been more effective if Vince hadn't been grinning like a maniac. McKinnon, I'm going to make this very simple. That ship is a rusted hulk. It would take a miracle to get it space-worthy, let alone race-worthy. You'd need parts, expertise, and more luck than exists in the known universe.
So you're saying there's a chance?
No! Torrington slumped back in his chair, suddenly looking tired rather than angry. Look, I get it. You want to give these kids something to believe in. But this is impossible. Vince leaned forward, his manic energy suddenly focused. Principal Torrington, with all due respect, these kids have been told their whole lives what's possible. They've been told they can't compete, can't succeed, can't dream big because they're from the wrong side of the station. Maybe it's time someone told them different. Torrington stared at him for a long moment. Then he sighed, the sigh of a man who knew he was about to make a terrible decision. You really think you can get that pile of scrap race-worthy? I rebuilt a 98 Mustang from the 20th century from parts I found in a junkyard when I was 16. Made it run a quarter mile in under 12 seconds. Vince's eyes gleamed with memory. This is just like that, but in space, with more radiation and possible death. You're not selling this well. I'm being honest, but principal, these kids need this. They need to know that someone believes they can do more than just survive. Torrington was quiet for a long time. Finally, he opened a drawer and pulled out a form that looked like it hadn't been used since the station was new. Fine. You want the ship? Here's the deal. You get that relic mission capable in 1 week, 7 days, McKinnon, and you can enter the race. But, he held up a finger as Vince started to celebrate, you can't buy a single part. Not one. Everything has to be salvaged, scrounged, or built from scratch. The school budget is already stretched past breaking. Deal! And you personally assume all liability for injuries, deaths, or interdimensional rifts. Deal. And when this goes horribly wrong, which it will, you don't come crying to me? Triple deal. Vince grabbed the form and signed it with a flourish before Torrington could add more conditions.
You won't regret this.
I already do, Torrington muttered as Vince bounced out of the office. He reached for his antacids, then paused. Despite himself, a small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Maybe, just maybe. No, he was definitely going to regret this. The classroom had never seen Vince move so fast, and that included the time he'd accidentally set his demonstration on fire and had to beat it out with a periodic table. "Ladies and gentlemen, and all manner of sentience," he announced, practically glowing with excitement. "We're doing it!"
Doing what?
Dante asked suspiciously.
The race! The Terminus Terror Run! We're entering!
The silence that followed was deafening. Even the ventilation system seemed to hold its breath.
That's not funny,
Tommy said finally.
It's not a joke.
Vince pulled up the holographic schematics on the classroom's ancient projector.
Meet our ride. A genuine Stingray security interceptor, circa 2271. She's got good bones, a chassis that could take a direct hit from a meteor, and absolutely nothing else.
The technical specifications floated in the air, and despite themselves, the students leaned forward. Kix's form literally brightened as she processed the data.
Those stress tolerances are theoretical maximum,
she said, her voice taking on an unusual note of excitement.
If we could actually achieve even 80% of spec. The sensor suit is ancient,
Specs added, her sonar clicking rapidly as she analyzed the design.
But the architecture is solid, with some creative programming and maybe some definitely legal modifications. Are those Class C weapon hardpoints?
Tommy asked, his voice reverent.
Decommissioned,
Vince said quickly.
Completely non-functional. Absolutely no way to make them operational within the race regulations. Probably.
This is insane, Dante said flatly.
You're talking about taking a 50-year-old wreck and racing it against schools with unlimited budgets and actual engineers.
53-year-old wreck, Vince corrected.
And yes,
that's exactly what I'm talking about. Unless you've got something better to do with your afternoon. More sitting around being told what you can't do. Dante glared at him. But there was something else in his eyes now. A spark that hadn't been there before.
Where is this miracle ship?
Griselda asked, her translated growl carrying a note of hope.
Munitions Bay 7.
Want to meet her? The students exchanged glances. It was Dante who finally shrugged and stood up. Whatever. Can't be worse than advanced xenobiology. Munitions Bay 7 hadn't seen visitors in decades. The bay doors groaned in protest as Vince cranked them open manually, rust flaking off in sheets that sparkled in the dim emergency lighting.
Oh,
Tommy said softly.
Oh no.
The Stingray was, to put it charitably, a disaster. The skeletal frame sat in the cradle of decay. More rust than metal, more memory than machine. Panels hung loose like broken teeth, and something that might have been an engine was visible through gaps in the hull.
It's dead,
Dante said flatly.
It's a corpse.
It's a project, Vince countered, already circling the wreck with the enthusiasm of a kid in a candy store. Look at these lines! Classic Interceptor design. They don't make them like this anymore.
There's a reason for that,
Specs muttered. But Kix was moving closer, her rock form shifting as she examined the hull.
The base structure is sound. See these stress points? They're over-engineered by at least 40%. Whatever else is wrong with it, this frame could take some punishment. Oh shit, look at this!
Dante said suddenly, brushing decades of grime off a corroded component. A logo appeared, faded but recognizable.
Monarch thrusters? That's high-end stuff. Like professional racing high-end.
Vince's grin threatened to split his face. Someone loved this ship once. Someone put real money into it before she got decommissioned.
It's still a wreck,
Griselda pointed out. But even her growl sounded less certain. Thermodynamics Lesson 1, Vince said, grabbing a wrench from a nearby toolkit that looked as ancient as the ship. He tossed it to Dante, who caught it reflexively. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transferred. So let's transfer some of this rust into a trophy. Dante looked at the wrench, then at the ship, then at Vince. You're serious about this? Dead serious. 7 days to make her race-worthy, using nothing but salvage and determination. It's impossible, which is exactly why we're going to do it.
That doesn't even make sense,
Specs said. Welcome to human logic, Vince replied cheerfully. We specialize in the impossible. It's literally what we're known for across the galaxy. Death World species, remember? We eat impossible for breakfast and ask for seconds. The students stood in a semicircle, staring at the wreck that was somehow supposed to become their racing ship. The smart thing would be to walk away. The sensible thing would be to laugh at the insane human teacher and his even more insane plan. But these kids had never been accused of being sensible. Where do we start? Kix asked. Vince's grin widened. First, we're going to need a lot more wrenches. The transformation of Classroom 47B into a theoretical engineering lab happened almost by accident. One day was a standard classroom with standard desks and a teacher who occasionally set things on fire for education. The next, it was command central for the most unlikely racing team in the station's history. Force vectors! Vince shouted over the screech of metal on metal. Dante, what happens when we apply 4,300 newtons of lift to a mass of... Kix, what's our current mass?
6,243 kilograms,
Kix called back, her form literally integrated into the ship's frame as she reinforced stress points.
44, 45. Tommy, stop adding mass. It's armor plating,
Tommy protested, welding another salvaged panel to the hull.
We need armor. We need to fly,
Dante shot back, but his hands never stopped their delicate work on the engine assembly. Something in him had awakened in the past 3 days, a natural understanding of mechanical systems that went beyond textbook learning. He could feel the engine's potential in the vibration of each component, diagnose problems by sound alone. Vince watched his students work with a pride that threatened to burst his chest. They divided into natural roles without being asked. Dante as pilot and primary mechanic, Kix as structural engineer, Tommy on defense systems, Specs handling electronics, and Griselda plotting navigation routes with an intuition that defied explanation.
The junkyard closes in 20 minutes,
Specs announced as she pecked a cobbled-together terminal.
Security sweep starts at 1900 hours.
Then we'd better hurry, Vince said, turning to the rest of the class. Even the students not directly involved in the build had been pulled into the project's gravity. Team 2, you're with me. Shopping trip. The station's junkyard was a testament to decades of dubious maintenance practices. Mountains of discarded parts rose like metal monuments to bureaucratic inefficiency. To most people, it was tetanus waiting to happen. To Vince and his students, it was Christmas morning. Spread out, Vince instructed. Remember, we need anything that can be repurposed. Coolant systems, power couplings, navigation components.
Mr. McKinnon?
One of the younger students, barely 14, held up what looked like a fusion manifold.
Is this useful?
Vince's eyes widened. That's a K-series flow regulator. Do you know how hard those are to find? Excellent work. He turned to the others. See? One person's trash is another person's trajectory compensation system. They worked with the efficiency of locusts, stripping useful components with an enthusiasm that would have worried the junkyard owner if he'd been paying attention, which he wasn't because Specs had helpfully made sure the security feeds were looping footage from last Tuesday. Back in Bay 7, The Stingray was slowly becoming less corpse and more comatose patient, showing signs of life. The skeletal frame now sported actual panels. The engine mount held something that might charitably be called an engine, and the cockpit had seats that probably wouldn't kill their occupants. Probably. "Chemistry pop quiz," Vince announced suddenly, making everyone freeze. "Tommy, what happens when we mix hydrazine with nitrogen tetroxide?" "Hypergolic reaction," Tommy responded instantly. "Spontaneous combustion on contact. No ignition sources needed." "Excellent. And that's why we're not using it in our fuel mixture. But what if we created a modified blend with..." He launched into a complex explanation that somehow involved 3 different chemical equations, a reference to bootlegging during Prohibition, and why you should never trust a fuel mixture that glows purple. The lessons had become seamless with the work. Physics through practice, chemistry through not exploding, engineering through desperate improvisation. It was a pedagogy by way of barely controlled chaos, and it was working. "That wiring harness is from 3 different manufacturers," Kix observed, watching Specs work. "It shouldn't be compatible." "Compatibility is a state of mind," Specs replied, her sonar clicking rapidly as she worked. "Also, I may have rewritten the definition of compatible in the ship's dictionary files. The computer believes it works, therefore it works." "That's not how electricity works," Kix said. "It is now." Meanwhile, Griselda sat in the navigation seat, her massive form surprisingly delicate as she traced patterns only she could see. Her species' natural magnetoception had revealed something unexpected.
"The station's power grid creates a secondary field,"
she explained to Vince, her growl translated into excited words.
"I can feel it through the walls, like rivers of energy flowing through specific channels."
"You can navigate by sensing the station's electromagnetic signature?" Vince asked, his mind already racing with possibilities.
"More than that, I can feel distortions, changes in the field that indicate structural elements, busy corridors, even maintenance schedules based on power draw patterns."
Vince stood very still for a moment, processing this. Then his grin returned, wider than ever. "Griselda, you beautiful butterfly bear genius! You've just given us an edge no one else has!" The first inter-school planning meeting was held in Apex Academy's conference room. Because, of course it was. The room screamed money. From the holographic displays to the chairs that adjusted automatically to each species' anatomy. Vince sat in his assigned seat, wearing his least stained vest, and trying not to touch anything expensive. "Welcome, racing teams," announced the coordinator, a Regillian whose tentacles moved in what was probably supposed to be a welcoming gesture. "Let's begin with safety presentations." One by one, team advisors presented elaborate safety protocols. Apex Academy's presentation included a 15-slide breakdown of their medical response team. Galileo Prep detailed their triple redundant life support systems. Even their middle-tier schools had impressive contingency plans. Then it was Vince's turn. He stood up, clicked to his single slide, white text on black reading, "Humans are from a death world. We'll be fine," and sat back down. The silence was deafening. "That's it?" The coordinator's translated voice carried what might have been horror. "That's your entire safety protocol?" "Well, I could add some animations if you like. Maybe some star wipes." "This is completely inadequate," a voice cut through the muttering. Fina Vril stood at the Apex Academy table, her arms crossed in what Vince was pretty sure was disapproval. Her scales a deep blue-black that seemed to absorb all light, rippled with indignation. "Safety regulations require comprehensive documentation of..." "Of what?" Vince interrupted cheerfully. "Medical procedures for a species that considers walk-it-off legitimate first aid? Emergency protocols for people who think that's probably not supposed to be on fire is an acceptable risk assessment?" This is exactly the sort of reckless behavior that... Fina paused, her secondary eyes narrowing as she noticed something on Vince's datapad. Is that a modified thrust vector configuration? Maybe. She moved closer, her species' natural grace making her seem to glide across the floor. That mounting angle would create significant turbulence unless you're planning to use the station's atmospheric recycling as a pressure differential buffer. Maybe. That's either brilliant or insane. ¿Por qué no los dos? Despite herself, Fina's scales shifted to a lighter shade. What Vince would later learn was amusement. You're actually serious about this race? As serious as a human gets about anything involving speed, danger, and the chance to blow things up for glory. She stared at him for a long moment, then made a gesture that might have been a shrug. Try not to die too quickly. It would reflect poorly on the competition. The sabotage happened on day 5, when exhaustion was setting in and their guard was down. Vince arrived at Base 7 to find his students standing in a circle of devastation. The Stingray, their beautiful work in progress, listed drunkenly against the bay wall. The primary steering assembly, the piece they'd spent 2 days calibrating, was twisted beyond recognition. Mooring clamps were cut, Dante said quietly, his usual defensive sarcasm replaced by something harder. Probably last night, when the morning shift started their engines for testing, the vibration sent her right into the wall. Apex? Tommy asked, though it wasn't really a question.
3D footage shows nothing,
Specs added, her sonar clicking agitatedly.
Someone knew exactly where the cameras were.
Vince stood very still, processing the damage. The race was in 2 days. The steering assembly was critical. They had no replacement parts, no budget, and no time. So, he said finally, who wants to learn about aggressive resource acquisition? The student stared at him.
Are you suggesting we steal from Apex Academy?
Kix asked. Steal is such an ugly word. I prefer involuntary donation or surprise borrowing, or my personal favorite, practical education and resource management.
That's definitely stealing,
Griselda growled. Yes, but with educational merit. Dante stepped forward, and for the first time since Vince had met him, the 17-year-old's eyes were bright with purpose. What do you need me to do? Well, Vince said, his grin turning predatory. How do you feel about piloting a maintenance drone? The mission, which Vince insisted on calling Operation Turnabout is Fair Play, despite everyone's objectives, began at 0200 hours. Apex Academy's workshop was a fortress of security, but fortresses were built to keep out rival schools and corporate spies, not a human teacher who'd spent his misguided youth liberating car parts from the grungiest chop shops. Specs, you're on electronic warfare, Vince whispered into the comm. Tommy, you've got distraction duty. Griselda, you're our early warning system. Dante? I know what to do, Dante said, his hands already working the drone controls. The maintenance unit, barely bigger than a basketball, zipped through the air with a precision that made Vince's heart swell with pride. He's going to need heart medication one of these days.
How are you doing that?
Kix asked, watching the feed as Dante navigated the drone through impossibly small gaps. Same way I stayed alive in the lower levels, Dante muttered. You learn to be small, fast, and invisible. The drone slipped through Apex's ventilation system like smoke, Dante's piloting turning what should have been clumsy machinery into an extension of his will. Security lasers were avoided by millimeters, pressure plates bypassed by using maintenance protocols, specs pulled from the ether. Target acquired, Dante reported. 1 steering assembly, mint condition, probably worth more than my entire neighborhood. Liberation authorized, Vince said solemnly. for education. That's when Tommy's distraction kicked in. The fire suppression system activated throughout the East Wing. A controlled chemical reaction that was technically just smoke bombs, but impressively apocalyptic looking. Alarms blared, security scrambled, and in the chaos, nobody noticed one small drone carrying one not-so-small steering assembly out through a maintenance hatch that shouldn't have been accessible.
Wait!
Specs said suddenly.
I'm in their system. There's a lot more here than just workshop schedules.
Focus on the mission, Vince warned.
No, these are station schematics. Old ones. Really old ones.
Her sonar pitched higher with excitement.
Mr. McKinnon, there are maintenance tunnels here that aren't on any modern map. Thermal exhaust vents from the original construction that were supposedly sealed, but...
Oh, download everything, Vince ordered, his mind already racing. Educational purposes. They made it out clean. The Apex security too focused on the chemical spill to notice their missing part. It wasn't until they were back in Base 7, installing their liberated component, that the full implications hit them.
These tunnels,
Griselda said, studying the stolen schematics.
I can navigate them. The old construction uses different materials. The magnetic signature is completely different from the modern sections.
It's a shortcut, Dante breathed. A path no one else knows about.
Through active thermal vents?
Kick's form shifted with concern.
The heat stress alone
would be completely survivable for a ship with over-engineered stress tolerances, Vince finished. Like, say, a 53-year-old Interceptor built when safety standards were more like safety suggestions. They looked at the Stingray, no longer seeing a salvaged wreck, but a secret weapon.
We're actually going to do this,
Tommy said, wonder in his voice. Do it? Vince laughed. We're going to win it. The night before the race, they made final adjustments by the light of welding torches and determination. The Stingray, now christened the Dog in honor of its junkyard heritage, looked like what it was. A fever dream of salvaged parts held together by creative engineering and sheer bloody-mindedness. Final systems check, Vince called out. Dante? Engines are probably not going to explode. Steering is responsive. I can work with this. Kicks?
Structural integrity is at approximately 70% of recommended parameters, but the frame will hold. I've made sure of that.
She paused.
Part of me is literally in this ship now. It better hold.
Tommy.
Defensive systems are completely legal and definitely not weapons. The fact that they could theoretically be used to create tactical smoke screens or electromagnetic pulses is purely coincidental.
Specs.
Navigation is online. Communication array is creative but functional, and I've programmed some surprises into the countermeasures suite, all technically within regulations. Technically.
Griselda.
I have memorized every route through the station. The shortcut is dangerous but viable. If Dante can handle the heat,
I can handle it, Dante said firmly. Vince looked around at his students, these kids who'd been written off by everyone, including themselves. They were exhausted, covered in grease and determination, and absolutely magnificent. You know what Apex calls us? He said quietly. The junkyard dogs. They think it's an insult.
Isn't it?
Tommy asked. Hell no. You know what junkyard dogs are? Survivors. Fighters. They're tough and smart and they don't give up. They take whatever's thrown at them and they make it work. He grinned. So let's show them what junkyard dogs can do. A hand fell on his shoulder. Vince turned to find Principal Torrington looking tired, but oddly proud. I should shut this down, the principal said. This is insane, dangerous, and probably violates at least 17 different regulations. Probably closer to 30, Vince admitted. But, Torrington continued, I was military for 30 years. I know what it looks like when a unit comes together, when individuals become a team. He looked at the students. I haven't seen spirit like this in, well, ever. Not at this school.
Sir?
Dante said, surprised. Don't crash, Torrington said gruffly. The paperwork would be a nightmare. He paused at the door. And McKinnon, that speech about believing in them? Next time, try not to make it where I can hear you. I'm supposed to be the hard-ass principal. As he left, Specs pulled up a hollow of the racecourse. It wound through the station's skeletal superstructure, past shipping lanes, through industrial sectors, around the main reactor, and finally, back to the starting point. 27 miles of pure danger.
Apex has won 6 years running,
She said.
Their ship is faster, newer, and piloted by someone with actual training.
But do they have us? Vince asked. Do they have Dante's instincts, Kix's engineering, Tommy's creative interpretation of defensive, your electronic warfare capabilities, Griselda's navigation? He shook his head. They have money. We have something better. What's that? Dante asked. We have nothing to lose and everything to prove. In my experience, that's the most dangerous combination in the universe. They spent the rest of the night going over plans, contingencies, and backup contingencies. When dawn broke through the bay's windows, painting the dog in shades of gold and possibility, they were ready. Places, everyone, Vince commanded. Dante, how you feeling? The 17-year-old settled into the pilot's seat like he was born for it. His hands found the controls, salvaged from 3 different ships, but wired to work as one. And his whole demeanor changed. The too cool facade was gone, replaced by focused confidence. Let's go make some noise, he said. Ha ha! That's my boy, Vince laughed. Remember, it's not about being the best. It's about being too stubborn to lose.
Is that another one of your motivational speeches?
Specs asked. No, Vince said, his grin pure human insanity. That's a promise. The starting line looked like a mechanical fever dream. 43 ships lined up in the vast launching bay, ranging from Apex Academy's sleek Predator to Galileo Prep's over-engineered monument to their physics department's budget. And then there was the dog, looking like it had already finished last in a different race and decided to try again out of spite. Ladies, gentlemen, and scientists, the announcer's voice boomed across the bay. Welcome to the 80th annual Terminus Terra Run, where speed meets danger meets questionable parental consent forms. Com check, Vince said for the makeshift command station they'd set up in a borrowed classroom. Dante, you reading me? Loud and clear, Turbo. Dante's voice was steady, but Vince could hear the adrenaline underneath. Though I still can't believe that's your actual nickname. Earned it fair and square. Racing a souped-up Civic against a Lambo in downtown old Detroit. I don't know what those are. Did you win? Hell no, but I made him work for it. Vince checked his screens, showing telemetry for the ship's cobbled-together sensors. Remember, the steering assembly is going to fail. We planned for this. I know. When it does, reroute to secondary thrusters using the bypass kicks installed. I know, Mr. McKinnon. We've got this. The starting horn echoed through the bay like the universe's angriest alarm clock. 43 ships lurched forward in a chaos of engines and ambition, and immediately, everything went wrong. The dog's salvaged steering assembly, their beautiful liberated component, chose that exact moment, barely a mile out, to remember it had been installed by teenagers running on energy drinks and determination. It failed spectacularly, sending the ship into a sideways drift that would have been artistic if it weren't potentially fatal.
Steering's gone! Fuck! How did it happen so fast? Dante announced, his hands frantically working the controls. Rerouting now!
What happened next was physically impossible, which made it perfectly on brand for humanity. Dante transferred steering control to the secondary thrusters, tiny maneuvering jets meant for minor adjustments, and turned them into a primary navigation system through sheer force of will and creative interpretation of physics. The dog spun, stuttered, and then shot forward like it had been kicked by an angry giant. "That's not possible!" Fina's voice crackled over the public channel from Apex's command station. "Those thruster configurations can't handle that kind of load." "Someone forgot to tell Dante," Vince replied cheerfully. The course started with a brutal run through the station's main shipping lane, where massive cargo haulers moved with the inexorable patience of glaciers. The racing strips had to thread between them like needles through a moving quilt made of death and insurance claims. "Tommy," Vince called. "You see that Apex ship trying to box us in?"
On it!
Tommy's voice was gleeful.
Deploying defensive countermeasure Alpha.
"What's Alpha again?"
We're about to find out.
A cloud of particles erupted from the dog's definitely not weapons ports. It was technically just chalk dust, laced with fine metallic shavings for extra flair. As the cloud billowed out, the dog's own engine wash, a superheated stream of ionized gas, blasted through it. The result was pure pyrotechnic art. The metallic dust ignited in a silent, brilliant flare of emerald and magnesium white light, expanding the cloud into a blinding, swirling nebula of chaotic energy. It was harmless, a light show with no concussive force. But to the Apex pilot, it was like having a star detonate directly in front of their cockpit. Their ship, suddenly blind, had to brake hard to avoid becoming intimately familiar with the cargo hauler. "That's my pyromaniac," Vince cheered. "Give that kid an A+ in applied chemistry. Specs, what's our position?"
17th and climbing, but the reactor section is coming up, and that's where...
She was cut off by an explosion of static as they entered the electromagnetic interference zone around the station's main reactor. This was the course's great equalizer, a section where standard navigation was useless, and pilots had to fly by instinct alone. Or, if you were Griselda, by feeling the magnetic currents flowing through the station's bones.
Hard left in 3 seconds,
She growled calmly.
2, 1, mark!
Dante responded instantly, trusting her completely. The dog carved through space that looked empty, but would have been a wall 2 seconds later.
Up 15 degrees, now down 20. Thread the needle between the 2 primary conduits.
They flew through the interference zone like it had directions painted on the walls, passing ship after ship that spun in confusion. By the time they emerged, they'd jumped to 7th place.
Holy shit!
Dante breathed.
Griselda, you're a genius! I just like magnets.
She replied matter-of-factly.
But thank you.
That's when they saw it. Ahead, one of the mid-tier school's ships had clipped a navigation beacon and was spinning out of control, venting atmosphere in a deadly spiral.
They're going to hit the superstructure,
Kix observed.
at that speed.
Dante, Vince said quietly. Your call. There was no hesitation. Specs, can we grab them with the mag grapples?
Yeah, but it'll cost us time.
Do it. The dog changed course, burning precious seconds to match velocity with the damaged ship. The grapples fired, cables stretching between the 2 vessels, and Dante had to fight both ships' momentum. Come on, he muttered, sweat beading on his forehead. Come on, you beautiful piece of junk. The dog's engines screamed protest. The salvaged frame groaned. But inch by inch, they pulled the damaged ship away from certain death. The crew ejected in escape pods as soon as they were clear, shooting a signal flare that in the universal language of racing meant, "Thanks for not letting us die."
Time lost, 43 seconds.
Specs reported.
We're back in 15th.
Worth it, Dante said firmly. In Apex Academy's command station, Fina watched the rescue on her screens. Her primary hands clenched the console while her secondary ones pulled up the dog's telemetry. These humans were insane. They'd just thrown away their chance at placing to save competitors. "Idiots," she muttered. Then, making a decision that would have shocked her teammates, she keyed in a specific frequency and transmitted 16 digits.
"Boss,"
one of her crew protested.
"that's our shield frequency." "I'm aware," she said coolly. "I'm also aware that our team tried to win this race before it started by sabotaging a ship held together by determination and prayer. We're going to win, but we're going to win fairly."
Back on the dog, Speck's equipment lit up with the intercepted transmission.
"Mr. McKinnon, someone just sent us Apex's shield frequency."
Someone?
"The transmission originated from Apex's command station."
Vince's grin could have powered a small city. "Tommy, you still got that EMP burst ready, bud?"
"Always."
"Save it. We might need to return a favor." They were approaching the shortcut. The entrance was barely visible, a maintenance hatch that hadn't been opened in decades, leading to thermal vents that were definitely not meant for racing. "This is it," Vince said. "Griselda."
"I can feel the path. The magnetic signature is like a river. But, Dante, it's going to be hot. Really hot."
"How hot?"
"Imagine flying through an oven that's on fire inside another oven."
"Sounds peachy." The dog dove into the maintenance tunnel at full speed, immediately entering a world of superheated air and metal that glowed with unfriendly intentions. The temperature inside the cockpit spiked despite Kix's improvised heat shielding.
"Hull temperature approaching critical,"
Kix reported, her form actually steaming out what little liquid it held.
"I'm redistributing my matrix to reinforce weak points, but just hold it together,"
Dante shouted, fighting controls that were becoming slippery with heat.
"How much further?" 800 meters.
Griselda's voice was strained.
"Hard right coming up now."
They burst through the thermal vents like a phoenix made of salvaged parts in teenage rebellion, trailing smoke and glory. The shortcut had worked. They were in third place, closing on second, with Apex's sleek Predator just ahead.
"Final stretch,"
Vince announced. "Everything you've got." That's when the dog started coming apart. It started small. A panel here, a sensor array there. But the heat stress from the vents combined with the accumulated damage from the race was taking its toll. Bolts sheared, welds cracked, and pieces of their beautiful mongrel ship began decorating the race course.
"We're losing structural integrity,"
Kix shouted.
"Multiple failures across—"
"I don't care if we cross the finish line as a flying engine block," Dante interrupted. "We're finishing this." Tommy's defensive systems fired one last time, creating a brilliant cloud of metallic chaff that sparkled in the station lights. It was supposed to be a smokescreen, but at their current speed, it became a glittering tail, making the dog look like the universe's most determined comet. Specs worked her magic one final time, hacking the race's broadcast system. Just for a moment, every screen in the station showed the dog's icon, now sporting a pirate flag that fluttered despite the lack of atmosphere. "Really?" Vince laughed. "A pirate flag?"
"Seemed appropriate,"
Specs replied.
"We're stealing this victory."
The finish line approached. Apex was pulling away, the superior ship finally showing its quality, a guaranteed first place. But the real fight was for second. The dog was losing momentum, its frame shuddering violently, while the third-place ship from Galileo Prep was closing the gap with terrifying speed.
"I have a lock on Apex!"
Tommy yelled, his voice a mix of desperation and savage glee.
"The EMP! Their shields are down! It'll fry their navigation for a few seconds! We can take first place!"
"No!" Dante's knuckles were white on the controls. The ship felt like a dying animal under his hands.
"Look at the power readings! We're dead in the water in 10 seconds! We won't even finish!"
The choice hung in the cockpit, as stark and brutal as the vacuum outside. A shot at glory that might cost them everything, or a struggle for survival. "Dante!" Vince's voice cut through the chaos, calm and sharp. Newton's third law. What's your call? The question sliced through Dante's panic. Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. His eyes widened, not just with understanding, but with a sudden, brilliant, and completely insane idea. He wasn't thinking about revenge on Apex anymore. He was thinking about physics. Tommy, forget Apex, Dante commanded, his voice ringing with newfound authority. Reroute the EMP charge. Vent the entire capacitor bank through the rear-facing ports. All of it, now! Tommy stared for a split second, processing the sheer madness of the order. You're trying to turn a weapon into a thruster? You're insane! His voice broke into a grin of pure, unadulterated joy. Doing it! Every defensive port on the dog's stern glowed with a terrifying blue-white energy. Instead of firing an outward pulse, the ship shuddered as the raw power of the capacitors was vented directly backward in a single, massive discharge. The equal and opposite reaction slammed the crew into their seats, turning the failing ship into a briefly ballistic missile. They crossed the finish line, sideways, on fire, propelled by a final, desperate act of ingenuity, half a ship's length ahead of the third-place finisher. Second place. The Junkyard Dogs had taken second place. The aftermath was chaos of the best kind. Emergency crews rushed to extinguish the parts of the dog that were still enthusiastically burning. Medical teams tried to examine the crew, who were too busy hugging each other to cooperate. And somewhere in the VIP section, Principal Torrington reached for his antacids while trying very hard not to smile. We did it! Tommy screamed, bouncing like a hyperactive electron. We didn't die! The ship held, Kick said wonderingly, looking at her hands that still showed stress fractures from holding the frame together. It actually held. Of course it did, Griselda rumbled, allowing Specs to hug her massive frame. We built it! But it was Dante who surprised everyone. The too cool teenager who'd spent months perfecting his air of disinterest was crying. Not sad tears, but the kind that came when you realized you were more than everyone said you were. Hey, Vince said softly, putting a hand on his shoulder. You okay? Dante wiped his tears, grinning through the tears. Nobody ever thought I could do anything, and You just piloted a flying scrapyard through hell and came out the other side, Vince finished. Yeah, you did that. A commotion at the edge of the celebration made them turn. Fina Vril was approaching, her scales shifting through what Vince was beginning to recognize as complex emotions. That was, she paused, searching for words, completely insane. Thank you. It was also brilliant. That shortcut through the thermal vents, using magnetoception for navigation, turning your defensive systems into propulsion. Secondary hands made a gesture that might have been applause. And the rescue. That was stupid, Vince suggested. Noble, she corrected. Something my team would never have done. She looked directly at him. You received our shield frequency. We did. Thank you. A flicker of confusion crossed her features. My team's telemetry shows you never even targeted us. You had the shot at first place. Why didn't you take it? Vince grinned, a tired but genuine expression. We had a choice. Use the EMP's power to hurt you, or use that same power to push ourselves over the finish line. We were falling apart. Turns out, we needed it more for the second one. Fina processed this, her gaze intense. The humans hadn't chosen nobility over revenge. They had chosen survival over everything, and had turned a weapon into a tool to achieve it. It was a level of pragmatic desperation she found both alien and deeply admirable. We still won, she stated, as if testing the fact. You did. But you won something else. She gestured at his students. who were now posing with their second-place trophy like it was made of gold-pressed latinum. You won their faith in themselves. Before Vince could respond, she leaned in closer. There's a supply closet on level 7, maintenance code 4478. 10 minutes. She glided away, leaving Vince standing there with what Dante would later describe as the dumbest grin in human history. Mr. McKinnon, Specs called. You need to see this. The broadcast was showing highlights from the race, but it was the commentary that caught their attention. Unprecedented performance from Terminus Theta Secondary School. Their ship, built entirely from salvaged components, not only completed the course, but demonstrated the kind of innovative engineering that... We're famous, Tommy crowed. More than that, said a new voice. They turned to find a well-dressed Quellian in corporate attire. I represent Monarch Technical Solutions. You did some brilliant work on our old T-55S. If you have the time, we'd like to discuss some sponsorship opportunities for next year's race. More representatives appeared. Kix fielded 3 scholarship offers in as many minutes. Specs was handed business cards for legitimate security consulting. Even Tommy got an internship offer, though the company rep looked slightly nervous about the defensive systems specialist title on his resume. I don't understand, Dante said, still clutching the trophy. We didn't even win. Sometimes, Vince said, winning isn't about coming first. It's about proving you belong against all odds. By the end of the month, Classroom 47B was different. The salvaged parts were gone, replaced by actual equipment donated by various corporations impressed by the race. The students were different too, sitting straighter, engaging more, carrying themselves like people who'd looked impossible in the eye and made it blink. Newton's third law, Vince announced, and the class actually paid attention. Can anyone tell me? Every action has an equal and opposite reaction, the entire class chorused. Outstanding. And how do we know this? Because we strapped rockets to a junker and rode it to glory, Dante called out, getting a laugh from everyone. Precisely. And today, we're going to discuss how those principles apply to... Vince paused, looking at the door where a familiar figure stood. Class, I'd like you to meet our new teaching assistant, Miss Vril. She's here to ensure you receive a balanced education. Vina entered, her scales a professional neutral shade that didn't quite hide the amusement underneath. I look forward to explaining why Mr. McKinnon's approach to physics violates several fundamental laws of the universe. And I look forward to proving that human stubbornness is the most fundamental law of all, Vince countered. The class groaned, but it was the good kind of groan. The kind that said they were in for an interesting semester. After class, Vince found Dante working on something in the corner. Blueprints for next year's race. Already planning our victory? Vince asked. Someone's got to, Dante replied, but his smile took the edge off the words. Hey, Mr. McKinnon, that whole energy can't be created or destroyed thing? Yeah. Thanks for showing me I had it in me all along. I just needed someone to help me transfer it into something useful. Vince's throat felt suspiciously tight. That's what teachers do, Dante. We see the potential energy and help you make it kinetic. That's the worst physics pun you've made all week. The week's still young. Principal Torrington appeared in the doorway. McKinnon, a word. Out in the hallway, Torrington pulled out a data pad. Insurance claims from the race. You said 4 separate safety records. Really? For violations. Also, the fire marshal wants to discuss your teaching methods, and I've had 3 different government agencies ask if you're secretly military because no civilian should be able to do what you did with those kids. So, you're firing me? Torrington snorted. Hell no. Enrollment applications are up 400%. Every parent in the lower levels wants their kid in your class. Just try to keep the explosions educational. No promises. As Torrington walked away, muttering about antacids and early retirement, Vince looked back into his classroom. Dante was explaining thrust vectors to a younger student, using the same infectious enthusiasm Vince had shown him. Kix was sketching structural improvements on the board. Tommy was definitely not building another smoke bomb, no matter what it looked like. And Fina, she was correcting someone's math with the patient exasperation of someone who'd found exactly where she was supposed to be. The trophy sat on Vince's desk, second place displayed proudly. Someone had added a plaque. Junkyard dogs, too stubborn to lose. Vince grinned. Time to plan next year's race. After all, they had a title to defend. And this time, they were thinking bigger. Much bigger.